All right, Zig coming in at the top. Today on the show we have Steve Dawson. You might know Steve from Dolly Varden or his solo career or maybe as a side player in a plethora of different bands. But not only that, Steve's a really cool guy. He's a down-to-earth, insightful, deep-thinking individual who's also a teacher. He teaches at Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago, teaches a songwriting course. And not only that, he's got a book called Take It to the Bridge, where he takes the best of his lessons, and the most efficient that he's found throughout the years, and shares those exercises with you. Steve's got a new album coming out. It's called At the Bottom of the Canyon in the Branches of a Tree. We're going to listen to the song 22 Rubber Bands. 22 Rubber Bands, At the Bottom of the Canyon in the Branches of a Tree. Steve Dawson. The album's out now on all streaming platforms. What was cool about this interview was there was more mishaps than maybe in some other ones. And I became aware of his book, Take It to the Bridge, the week of, and I ordered it off of Amazon in a hurry to try to get it and read it before I talked with Steve, because I knew if someone had a songwriting book and I was about to interview the songwriter, there would definitely be questions about the book. So I was bummed out because I didn't get the book in time. But it was all right. We had the chat and it was going good. And then he had to bounce because he had a lesson to do, because he's a real deal working musician. And he said, "Why don't we pick it up later?" I'm like, "Yeah, cool. That's a good idea, because then I can read the book." And 2 days later, I got the book and read it in a hurry, and then we did part 2. So this interview is broken up over a week. You're going to hear the big chunk, which is the initial conversation, and then mostly pertaining to the new record and his career up until. And then you're going to hear part 2, which is a little more songwriter focused, with more questions about his book, Take It to the Bridge. If you guys can like, rate, review, subscribe, and follow the podcast on all the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to awesome guests and sharing those insights with you. So without further ado, Steve Dawson. So let's get into it. What can you tell me about Miss Terry?
Ha! Awesome. Linda Terry was my first guitar teacher in 7th grade. We moved to Idaho from California, and we arrived late, so registering for classes, a lot of the elective classes were filled, and the counselor guy said, "Well, you could take guitar." I was like, "Well, I don't have a guitar," but so they figured out a rental for me, and it ended up being like a life-changing thing. And Miss Terry was an Idaho fiddle champion. She was a hippie lady. This was 1977, in a very sort of conservative world. She was a very different, very, very different. And the classes were in the basement. I remember the principal used to come down and look in on the class and just shake his head, because she had us singing, peace and love songs. She loved John Denver so much, and she would have us sing "Sunshine on Your Shoulders," and then we're a bunch of 14-year-old
Right.
olds, and she'd be like, "Okay, now, what does it mean to feel the sunshine on your shoulders? Let's really think about this and feel it and close your eyes." And so she made me think of songs completely differently than I'd ever thought of them before, and that they were important, and that they were about life experience. And she just loved music so much, and she was so encouraging. So all those things made me just want to make music and be a better guitar player and write songs, all those things. I credit her with basically getting me started on this whole thing.
That's amazing. It's crazy to think, like, when you analyze a song, you kind of just hear it, especially at that age. You're not really
Yeah,
like diving into what is it to have sunshine on your shoulders. I don't know. It's a happy sounding thing.
right.
To really kind of get past that, and at that age to be able to kind of open your mind in that way. Like
Yeah.
that's that 13, 14. What's that, like middle school-ish? Yeah, you said
Mm-hmm.
seventh grade.
Yep.
So you're not really like you're still trying to be cool, trying to fit in.
Sure.
You're
Totally.
not really
Yeah.
figuring yourself out yet. So to find a teacher that can kind of like get you into that form of thinking through a class that you fell into is pretty outstanding.
Yeah. No, it was pretty radical. She was something else. And I thought of reaching out to her, but for some reason I haven't. I keep every time it comes up, I think I should reach out to her and let her know, and then I don't. But I maybe this will inspire me to finally actually do that.
That'd be awesome. I'm sure she would appreciate it. And with the body of work that you've compiled since then, we'll have her homework cut out for her to catch up
Yeah,
if she
right.
hasn't been
I know.
following. That's awesome. And like it's interesting. I mean, I guess with John Denver's works at the time, that's when he was kind of in his prime.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
like, but as far as a songwriter, that's what a great place to start.
I think so because the raw material of song is so strong in those. I mean, the melodies. I teach guitar now in Chicago, and we do John Denver songs, especially for people first starting out, because they're usually three basic chords, um, pretty straightforward structures and strums and all that kind of stuff. But the melodies are so good, like Leaving on a Jet Plane or Sunshine
Right.
on My Shoulders. They're just these sort of timeless, beautiful melodies. He really had a gift for melody. And and the lyrics are, they're evocative and they have nice imagery. So yeah, as far as the raw material for song, it was a good place to start for sure.
Right. There's no burying the lead in a John Denver song. You know what I mean?
Right, right, right. It's
Leaving on
true.
a jet plane, I get what's going on.
Totally, totally.
That- but so coming from coming from that as far as a place of songwriting, um, what what was the next step for you?
Well, once I was playing guitar, all the relatives for my birthday or for Christmas would send me songbooks. Like that was back then. There was no internet, and people. So I would got the Simon and Garfunkel songbook. I got the Paul Simon or the Neil Young. I got a. They would have these books of the whole album of Harvest in a
Right.
book,
Yeah.
or the James Taylor Greatest Hits songbook. And so I just sort of gobbled those up. I would just get them and check the records out of the library if they weren't already in my dad's collection, and just learn every song. And the big one for me, the one I begged for, was this Beatles complete songbook that was for sale at the local music store, but it was something like $25, and I thought, oh, that's way too much.
Huh.
But I got it for Christmas, and I was a Beatles fan since I was a little kid. They were my favorite band as a little kid, so I knew all those songs by heart. So then to open that up and try to play those, plus that was a pretty big step up from those 3 and 4 chord songs, the Beatle
Right.
chords. There's a lot of fancy chords in there, so that was I had to push myself. I think I made myself learn bar chords so I could play I Am the Walrus. So because you can't play it just moves in whole steps with all those
Right.
bar chords. And they had the little diagrams in the book, so if I didn't know, like, how to make a C minor or something, I was like, well, there's the picture of it. I just had to figure out how to make that happen.
The Beatles. It's interesting because they come from the rock basic, the 3 chord thing. But the Beatles that kind of everyone knows is this vast like studio like session group that has these immense harmonies and well thought out like
Yeah,
there's as far as a band that's done it, that's it. And if you're gonna be moved to the next spot, it'd be from diving into them. That makes sense. That makes
yeah.
sense. Was it? And it's songwriting too, like going linear with that. Like when did you start was it after like dissecting these Beatles songs and getting I'm pretty sure I've seen that complete songbook, right? It's black on the front. Just
Exactly.
okay, yeah. It's
Yep.
like thick.
Yeah.
Um, but for moving on from that, like, when did you start writing your own stuff? Was it from picking apart these Beatles songs and like this bar chord, I can move this, and like, and I now have the power of whole steppage, or like, was it like
Well,
later?
sort of. I think the
Okay.
first songs I was writing were just joke songs to crack people up, like crack friends up, or like I'd,
Yeah.
you know, make up new words to leaving on a jet plane and just kind of. But then I don't remember exactly what inspired me to first start writing sort of, my own songs that weren't silly songs, that were like, for lack of a better word, that were serious or
Yeah.
real songs. Um, it might have been Neil Young. I mean, I loved Neil Young then, and I love him now, and those songs sort of spoke to me in a way that a lot of others didn't. And I thought, oh, you could write about anything, and you could write about your own feelings and your own thoughts, and sing in your own voice. So I started doing that sometime around there, and then trying to write Beatles songs, but it didn't even occur to me that the Beatles were even something approachable as something I could ever possibly recreate, because those songs just seemed, like you said, the sound of those records was so immense and sort of fixed that there's just like, it didn't sound like anything I could recreate or create
Right.
on just a guitar.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind to think. I don't know if I even thought like how they possibly could have done it. It was just like, that's not, but like Neil Young, like Harvest, like Old Man or something like that. It's like, oh, well, that sounds like a guitar and somebody singing. Or James Taylor, like those early James Taylor records. It's like, oh, I can make it sound basically like that, you know?
Right. No, that makes sense. It's an approachable thing, and like
Yeah.
you can boil it down. Um, kind of going through your discography, which is, man, your output is immense. Like
Oh, thanks.
you're the I got questions on that later, but like and like it bounces everywhere throughout your solo career and in the band's career. But like was there a particular Beatle? Because I kind of that drew you in. Not the like. I want to elaborate more on the Neil Young thing, but like
Yeah.
I kind of hear some Lennon-y melody tendencies.
Ooh, well, I would like to believe that. I mean,
Okay.
I think I like them all. I mean, I think as an individual, I probably identify with George Harrison more, just because music became kind of a spiritual pursuit for him. But as far as musicality, I love all three of them.
Right.
I mean, Paul's incredible sense of melody, John Lennon's ability to, I don't know, really get to the heart of things. It's got a darkness to it that's really um, compelling. George Harrison has this kind of sweetness, but even he wrote, I don't know. The thing about George Harrison that's really fascinating is you can really see the progression of his playing and writing through the course of the Beatles, which is pretty fascinating. There's not too many artists you get to really experience their growth
right.
that directly. Like Paul McCartney seemed to have hatched into the world like this
Yeah.
immensely talented and gifted artist that just like, oh, he's always been able to do that somehow. But with George, he wasn't all that great, and then he got better and better and better and tried lots of different things, and it's just really interesting. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I maybe as a songwriter, just as the raw material of writing, I guess I probably like John Lennon's songs a little better than the others, but his song, my friend Phil Angotti in town here did probably in 2019, did a John Lennon birthday show where they just did
Oh, that's cool.
songs from all eras,
Yeah.
even well into his solo. And it was just, when you pull them out and play them all back to back and not in chronological order, just kind of like, early Beatles stuff and then solo career stuff. And it was just completely staggering to think of the body of work of John Lennon. And just like, wow, that's another incredible song. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just going through it. I kind of I make little notes to myself when I'm studying someone to talk to them, and like that's kind of like a Lennon-y melody note. Like
Yeah.
I should have wrote down the song. Fuck. Like, but but yeah, it's interesting. Like with a band like that, because you can see them as a unit, right? And with any artist, usually, like how you're saying, you're seeing the end all be all. You're seeing the top of the game at that time, and like
Mm-hmm.
when you can trace someone's like progression to that point, I think more endearing, and maybe that's just
Yeah.
coming from a musical perspective. Like, oh, okay, that they got it really together on this record. This is cool, and maybe that's
Yes.
like seeing your friends play music and seeing them get to their influence they say they have. Like, I really love the Beatles, and your new record sounds like it could have been a Beatles thing. Cool. And
Right.
there's
Exactly.
maybe that's that being in the kitchen perspective type deal. But with the
Mm-hmm.
Beatles, you kind of like you have this chunk and you can tear it apart because you can see the solo career and you can be like, oh, that's what Paul did. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, there's
Right.
not too many bands like the Beatles at all, together or apart. But like, it's really
Right.
cool because you can dissect it in that way, even though it sucks that they broke up. But you get that
No,
cool.
I think that's really valid. And I never thought of it that way. But yeah, each of the individuals, you can really, you can really analyze them because they did make records by themselves. So he's like, oh, I see. Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of that.
Thanks. I don't know. So kind of the shifted back to like the Neil Young approach. So here's this, and I think a big step for anyone who wants to achieve any type of goal is finding the things that they can do. Right, the little steps, not the big jumps, because
Right.
that seems
Yes.
too impossible. So you're looking at these Neil Young records, and like this is a guy in a guitar, and like when did like the layer of like comedic comfort dissipate? Was it trying to emulate that? And like because like
Yeah.
I was talking with who was it? I can't remember. I'm blanking right now who I had this conversation with. But there's this comfort behind comedy. It's easier to kind of
Right.
go out and like do something with intent, and like but the intent being able to be written off as silly if it doesn't land. Like
Right.
was a
Right.
did you find that? Like was it there's that
Yes. Yes.
comedic okay.
I think pretty quickly.
Yeah?
Pretty quickly. I. I mean, because I was coming out of. We moved to Idaho because my mom tried to kill herself in California and put herself in the hospital, and we had to go live with my dad. I mean,
Yeah.
it was awful. And it was never really discussed. It was just this kind of buried, horrible thing. So to me, when I started hearing these records of people, like, there's all this sadness and loneliness in Neil Young records and
Yeah.
Jackson Brown and James Taylor and Joni Mitchell. There's all this kind of sorrow in there that really spoke to me, and I found it really comforting. And also like real, like there was so much not spoken about in my family at that time, even though there was all this trouble. No one ever talked about it. So to have these songs speaking to real things, it was like it felt like, oh, this is reality. These are people actually talking about reality, and it drew me in a way that nothing else did, and I at some point wanted to radiate that back, like the way that those records made me feel. which was, I can't describe it, but I wanted to be a part of that somehow. So I started trying to emulate the way that those records made me feel, which was not in any way funny. It was very, very serious. I don't know if serious is a terrible word, but it was just trying to get to the heart of what I was thinking and feeling through music and songs. So, yeah.
It actually really kind of hits home because in my family there was we had like there's a lot of alcoholism and a lot of things that
Hmm.
like when there's a real issue, it's addressed but then not addressed. Like
Right.
there's this oh shit, here's a thing, and then like it's all right.
Yeah.
No, we're going to go to the thing now, or yeah, it's weird that and like falling into like I was describing like teaching and seeing like kids go through all this stuff and like realizing that the only way to get through something is to address it at the moment
Yeah.
it's happening, and like if not that it kind of dissipates, not the trauma or the sincerity of or since whatever like the seriousness of what has happened, but the moment to make that shift or to
Yeah.
begin that, as opposed to the repression of those
Right.
feelings, which comes right after you start to make it comfy, and like, so that that really hits home because I kind of not as intensely as what you've been just described because that was like that's heavy. How old were you when that was happening?
Well, it was around the same time. So,
Okay, so this is like
like 12, 13,
okay.
14. Yeah.
So right when
Yeah.
you're starting to figure out who you are and go down that path, and like that is that why you guys moved to Idaho?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep. I mean, basically, it's a little more complicated, but basically, yeah.
okay. And was that a
Yeah.
big shift from California?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, from sunny San Diego,
Right.
and I could walk to school, and I had a lot of friends. And then in Idaho, we lived out on a dirt road with nobody else
Okay.
around.
Yeah.
I'd have to I had to ride a bus a long way to get to school, and then it would drop me back home, and I wouldn't see anybody till the next day.
Right.
I mean, I did go to this guitar songwriting camp with Richard Thompson in 2018, and he was talking about because someone said like, how did you learn how to play so well? And he's like, people have no idea how incredibly boring the Midlands of England is. He's like, I would get home from school and there was literally nothing to do. And he says, so I just played guitar. I played guitar for hours and hours every day because it was so incredibly boring. So,
That's the beauty of being away from of everything because
kind
you
of.
got that time to hone in on what you want to hone in, even though you don't want to. It's not ideally
Right.
what you'd be doing at that moment. Like,
Right. So I had all these songbooks, I had a guitar, and that was it, and a record player. So I just, yeah, I went all in.
gotcha. No, that makes sense. And then it's as a way to pass time, you're developing these skills and like
Yeah.
at least kind of putting yourself in a place that may feel more real than everything else that's going on. Oh, and then man, that's yeah, that's I'm losing my train of thought with it. But it makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense. That's where it would go.
Right.
So kind of going from that, like, was it like moving out of that or indulging in that situation? Was there a point where it became more real and these things were addressed family wise, or did it just kind of coast at that?
No,
No.
no. It's
Okay.
never really been addressed, ever,
Okay.
even now. And in fact, a lot of the songs on the new record are kind of about that and just kind of trying to let go of all that and forgive and move along. But yeah, it's never, yeah. My family's very, very stuck and very, yeah. But even, at the time, like the 70s or even into the 80s, like people didn't go to therapy. No one talked about this stuff. It was just like,
Right.
yeah, get over it,
Yeah.
So,
Figure it
but
out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it
So,
doesn't quite work as long as it's it maybe in one person's mind, but
right.
there's four. How big was your family?
Just me and my sister. My sister's older than
Okay,
me, and then my dad, stepmom, my mom. Yeah,
gotcha.
it was a pretty little family.
It's still that's four minds.
Right,
They
right.
well that makes I mean this new record in the bottom of a canyon in the branches of a tree or in a branch of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that imagery of what you just described of being kind of stuck in this thing and not kind of the bottom of the canyon. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Right.
know if that song's directly about this issue, but like that imagery with it and the title of the album for that really makes sense. And I think it's a
Oh,
beautiful way to
thanks.
put it.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that song is kind of. I mean, there's the verse about my sister and I, and that song was originally called My Sister. Was it Me and My Sister or something like that? But yeah, something like that.
Was was it with the kind of okay? They kind of jump into this because I found this album really beautifully done. Like, and it's interesting
Thank
the
you.
comparison from this newest record from Bonsai Funeral, like with that jazz ensemble like behind you and like this whole like different tonality, and this kind of brings it
Yeah.
back home to almost a more like I don't. It's a little more elaborate than just Neil Young and a guitar, but like kind of like shifting from like a whole ensemble of a thing, and where like that the Bonsai Funeral like really like I don't know why, but it made me think of like a Dylan record with instead of an organ, you have this cool vibe player, and
Oh,
like
cool. Yeah.
like and just how your vocal approach was at least on the first song from the Eyes Are Pond, like it starts off with this melody, then hits hard. It made me think of like that type of dynamic that you would see in a Dylan tune when he went electric, and had the organ
Okay.
behind him. But it was like this
Oh, okay.
beautiful jazz ensemble that would break down and would go into changes. Like they'd be playing like how that
Right.
before we get into the new record, how that project come about.
Um, I have known Jason Adashevitz is the vibraphonist you're talking about. He's a friend of mine. We worked together at a record store here for a while, and I became a fan of him and a bunch of the people. Chicago has had a really rich sort of improvised music, free jazz scene, and I became a fan of a lot of those musicians. I got to know a lot of them through the record store. It was a jazz record store, and I was seeing Jason's band called Roll Down, which had Jason Rebke in it. It had Frank Rosalie, and it just crossed my mind what would happen if I had these guys play behind me when I was, basically singing my songs, but I had this ensemble backing me. It just crossed my mind. I sort of put it back in the back of my mind this was probably in the 90s when I saw them. And then I had to get the nerve up to approach them about doing it. But once I did, they were all like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we played some shows, and it kept getting better and better. And so then I decided to write songs specifically with that project in mind and make a record with it. And that was in around 2013, I guess.
Those cats like that. It's weird. It's a different a jazzer compared to like a singer songwriter. There's an equal amount of work that goes into it. You know what I mean? Like as far as like the artistry and like
Hmm.
the craftsmanship shedding, right? Hitting the shed to
Right.
run scales and run over changes compared to hitting the shed and like writing. I imagine like,
Oh yeah.
but like so the kind of but there's this admiration for both angles. Like, man, if I just shed it on changes, I could hang with those guys. Or man, if I just like wrote some of my own shit, I can I can hang with those guys. But like so I can see where that would be intimidating to reach out.
Yeah.
But that
Well, and
record,
also, I mean,
sorry, I was gonna say that
I
record slams, but
oh, thank you, thank you. They the biggest difference is their approach to time, I think. Like rock players are a little more, I don't know what the right word is, because rigid is not a good word, but it's close to being accurate. But it doesn't, it's maybe time is a little more straight up and down. And with the improvising guys, time is a little more fluid and a
mm,
little more sort of washy,
yeah,
and in a really nice way, so that things feel a little more, I can't describe it other than just kind of like I've described it as feeling like floating.
that makes
There's a
sense.
floating
Yeah.
quality to it. So yeah, I mean, I went to the Berklee College of Music in Boston in the 80s, and the jazz musicians then were very snobby and
Mm,
very disdainful of rock and pop and that sort of stuff. And I really kept it under wraps that I was a singer songwriter for the first year or so there, because it would be, I would be frowned upon. I remember having a Van Morrison cassette sitting out on my desk once, and someone saw it and were like, Van Morrison, ugh. And so I was like, oh shit, gotta hide the singer songwriters from these people. Um, so it was actually really refreshing. The Chicago guys have none of that. None of that. Like, you know, Jason Shevitz can go on and on about the band as much as, John Coltrane. And I love that. They're very open minded, very much about like, let's make this work. And yeah, the more I've gotten to play with them, the more I've experienced that it's always a yes and
right. Yeah.
situation, right? So it just feels good.
That's beautiful. And that's the essence of jazz or music in general should be that. It shouldn't be include or not including others. Like it should
Right.
be welcoming of it. Like it's easier. What can you do with one chord? You can do a lot with
I
one
know.
chord.
Yeah, I know.
And like as opposed to, and even jazzers can be like, well, I can hyperimpose this harmony on one chord. Makes your life easier, guys. Come on, like. But that's awesome. So get leading up to Boston. What like from the Neil Young songs, right? And like diving into it and relating and finding your own. In starting to write your own, when did like the idea that taking these songs you started to write and performing become a thing?
Yeah. Well, I was, in high school. It was a little high school. My graduating class was like 70 people, and there were music on, what do you call it, like recitals in the auditorium every semester. I guess there was like an end of semester. The band would play, the choir would play, and I don't remember how, but I ended up being like, I would come out and sing a song during those. So I think those were the first public performing situations. And I remember being nervous, but also being relatively confident too, and enjoying it. And it started occurring to me, oh, this might be something I want to do. But I don't remember being particularly good at performing. It was just, I kind of enjoyed the feeling of it. Um, and then I started playing occasionally in, like, I mean, I was too young to be playing in bars. But my guitar teacher, there was this really great guitar player that was doing lessons in Idaho. I don't know how he ended up there, but he started occasionally getting me gigs, and even as I was underage, I was playing with this country band named Cadillac Carl and the Road Rangers. I was
Nice.
subbing for my guitar teacher as the lead guitar in this country band at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Bellevue, Idaho. And or I'd be like he accompanied some singers in some bars. We were relatively close to Sun Valley, Idaho, so there was some fancy restaurants that would have a live singer, guitar player, and I would occasionally do those gigs, subbing for him. So it wasn't me performing my own music, but I was performing and getting experience playing shows.
Right. In a vast, like, that's not just like to play lead in a country group and to back a singer songwriter or back a singer. Like, those are two different mindsets you got to be in as far as performance, and like two different positions to learn to take.
Right.
So,
yeah. I've always loved, like, one of my favorite things to do is to play bass in a band.
Yeah.
I love all aspects of music, I love playing bass. I love trying to play drums. I love singing harmonies. I love writing songs. I like trying to play lead guitar. I mean, it's just everything about it is fascinating, every aspect of it, and I just can't get enough. So, I think, it was super fun playing with Cadillac Carl and the Road Rangers in this little divey bar in Idaho. Super fun, and a huge learning experience because, they were veterans, and, they would kind of, when they turn around and give me a nod and say, like, nice job, it just felt so good,
Right.
But then they'd also pull me aside and say, like, yeah, you don't need to play so much on that part. So he's like, they were very kind and kind of encouraging, like, hey, look at the kid, the kid's doing okay. So I didn't start playing my own songs really until I was in college. Like, I didn't play but the songs I was writing for people.
Was that Stump the Host when you started doing your own stuff?
No, it was a little before that. In Boston, I would just play in a bar. I'd sit in a bar and sing songs and mostly covers, and then add in my own songs.
Gotcha.
Stump the Host was when I moved to Chicago in the late '80s and started the band Stump the Host, and that was performing all my own songs with a band.
Okay, so from shedding it, from doing the gigs in Boston, learning and writing your own stuff, and then moving to Chicago, that's and finding the group.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I mean, those bar gigs like that are such like a build me up, destroy me situation. Like
yeah,
when you're
totally.
when you're playing in the back of the room and you play the Van Morrison song and everyone's like, yeah, and then like you do your own song that you put way more time into, and they're kind of like,
yeah, the din of conversation rises.
right,
yeah,
right,
sure.
right. Wow, that's a beautiful way to put that. Did you in Boston, like through college, did you take any songwriting courses, or was the songwriting courses just like from studying other songwriters on your own?
Just from self-study.
Okay.
The guy, you might know, this guy named Pat Pattison, who writes these The Craft of Lyric Writing. He was the poetry teacher at Berklee, like, because
Okay.
they have you can get a regular degree there, but they have to, like, to cover, like, the English.
Right.
The English department was Pat Pattison teaching poetry, and the science department was teaching acoustics and stuff like that.
Oh,
But
that's sick. Yeah.
so I took Pat's poetry writing classes, which I found really helpful in terms of just the musicality of language, and he was great. He was great. And then he started teaching a lyric analysis class. I think that was the beginning of the songwriting department at Berklee, but it called the songwriting department yet. It was just being born, and it's become a whole department now. But it was at that point it was just lyric analysis as part of the English department.
And was it?
But that was really helpful.
Yeah. Did like it dissect stuff like symbolically, like how like?
Yep.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, use of language, use of metaphor, the sound of language, the structure, like verses, choruses, bridges, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
How much of that kind of ended up in Take It to the Bridge, the book you wrote on songwriting?
Some.
Okay.
A lot of that book is based on the classes I teach.
Okay.
Which is, I at that point I had been teaching songwriting at the Old Town School of Folk Music here in Chicago for probably 10 years, and it was just the sort of the best of the stuff I had learned through teaching.
Okay.
The stuff that seemed to resonate with people, and the stuff that people have found most helpful for their own writing. And I'm sure there's a little bit of the stuff I learned from Pat Pattison in there for sure.
I ordered it and like I don't know, something happened, so I'm supposed to get it tomorrow, which I'm gonna really bummed out about because I'm gonna have the conversation today, but I won't be able to.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have more questions about it because I've been personally just diving into reading a bunch of books on songwriting because like it's interesting. Like there's not with that or just music education in general, right? You learn all the how to organize notes, how everything works, like as far as academically, but you don't really learn the creative aspect of it. Like, and maybe
Right.
that maybe I'm speaking for me, from my experience. I don't know if hopefully it was different for you, but I feel like a lot of times you learn how harmony and stuff is structured, and like, but when it comes to writing your own stuff or doing your own composition, it's kind of like, okay, well, I showed you what other people did, and like there's almost a weird disconnect where like
Sure.
the analyzing of something and seeing how it works and then applying it to your own emotions and like learning how to express yourself through it isn't as addressed. And like, and I feel like with the songwriting course, that's kind of where it's all into, or like at least the few books I've read on the songwriting through the shutdown, the self studies.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of, a lot of them lead, the question is blank. It's like, here's the premise and then fill in the blank type deal. Not like,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean? Like,
Well, I mean, yes, most songwriters, me included, talk about songwriting as being a little mysterious.
right.
And so that aspect of it, you can't teach that.
Yeah.
But you can help someone to get into that sort of space where things appear. And that's what I try to do. I try to have people do free writing. I try to have them, play a chord progression and then just start singing things off the top of their head. And a lot of times when you do that, a phrase will pop out, and who knows where it comes from, right? I mean, it's just, and then you try to just follow that. Some of the best interviews along those lines are with Paul Simon, who seems very, very willing to talk about that process of just letting the song go where it wants to go. So I recommend people read that. And the creative process is, it's still a mystery, which is it's great. I love that it's a mystery. And there's a lot of books about the creative, trying to get yourself into that open space where things can happen.
Right.
But yeah, you can't say, well, here's how you write a song.
Right.
And I would be dubious of anyone who said that, because it is a mystery.
So I guess maybe to rephrase kind of where I was going with it is like so I can't remember if it's the analogy of the cave or the trial of Socrates, but there's this bit out of the Plato writing where it's like Socrates is trying to find the truth, and he goes to all these people to find the truth, and he goes to the poet, and the poet can't have the truth because the poet is just open to perception and puts it out. Basically, like they write down whatever muses they pick up, and like it's crazy that that's an ancient Greek thing, but that makes so much sense with like
Totally.
writing in general. That the fact that it's still a mystery, and like so how important is it to accept failure as far as like writing, right?
Wow.
How do you like to be open to this, right? You got to accept that it's not going to be the best thing ever. You're just going to write a thing and move on.
Yeah, that's hard. I guess I try not to think about that. I try not to let myself go there. The frustration can definitely kick in, but maybe that's the one thing that experience of doing it for so many years is that you trust yourself and you trust the process enough that if it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. And I do remember, like in high school, having songs not work and being just like, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept trying to solve it. Like I could not let go of a song that wasn't working. It would drive me insane. And now if a song's not working, I'm like, oh well, whatever. It's not like I'm not going to write another one. So I guess experience is the antidote to that.
Yeah, and I guess maybe failure is not the right word from it, but knowing when to move on from it and let it go and see where it goes.
That is hard.
Yeah.
Especially when a song has a part, like there's a part of it that you really like, oh, that's really good. And then the rest of it is, actually there's another Paul Simon interview where he says that no song is, it's very, very rare to get 100% on a song. There's almost always something in every song where you're like, well, that could have been better. And to hear him say that was really helpful, because I'm like, oh, well, yeah, definitely. Like I could go through every song and point out, well, yeah, I wish that part was better, but the rest of it's pretty good. So at some point you have to let go,
right?
or you'd never release them. And I do know people who are very talented as songwriters who never release anything because they want them to be perfect, and they will never be perfect.
It's interesting because there's that admiration for someone who seeks perfection, but also that is such an impossible like feat. It's just as admirable for someone who puts out what they made and where it's at, and like you usually that moves a little bit more. There's something more about something that's not perfect, something that's reachable that resonates, I think, more with people. Maybe I should say the I statements that resonates with me.
Yeah.
Do you have a creative routine? Because like going through there's Dolly Varden has like 6 albums. You have 4, and this is about to be the 5th, right? There's an immense amount of writing that those aren't those are the cream of the crop during each time period. I imagine
well, it's stretched out over 30 years. So
right.
It's not as much as it seems, I guess.
Jimi Hendrix only had 3 records.
Well,
I get despite some, whatever.
Yeah.
But do you have like a routine that you do every day? Do you write every day? Do you like strum like out and just like do a mumble melody every day? Do you have like
I wish I did.
Yeah.
No, I go through periods where I write a lot and periods where I don't.
Okay.
but I play music every day for hours because I'm teaching and recording. I have a little recording studio, and I record other people, and so my hands are on instruments for many hours every day, and it doesn't take too long for a song to get started. So even if a student doesn't show up, or someone's running late, or I have a half hour between one thing and the next, I'm sitting there with a guitar. A lot of times something will pop out. A lot of songs get started that way. But I don't have a steady creative practice. I wish I did, but I don't.
I imagine that would be it's hard to do. Like I personally have been trying to install one for myself,
Yeah.
and like it goes really well for a while, then it stops, and then I have to like. But
Yeah.
it's like how you're saying it's something so it could be a blank day where you have nothing, or it can be a very inspired day, and like where something pops up and then you're like, oh, that makes sense, and it's like how to go back to the magic of it, and like try to like train. It's not train to try to teach someone to hear it and be in that moment of it. Is it more of a thing like that? Of like, there's a spark of an idea, and the like as far as like a skill set to develop as a songwriter is like being able to be in that moment with that spark and let it become a
Yes.
flame, or is it
Yes.
the ability to start that spark, or is it both? I don't know if that's a good question or if that makes sense.
Well, one thing I've noticed that is important is to have some kind of a deadline,
Okay,
because otherwise
parameters.
you can just kind of free float and put it off, and you're like, I'm not feeling like it right now. But if you have, like, we have monthly get together with other songwriters that we've continued through the pandemic online. Most of the songs on the new record were written for, like, were first appeared in that group, and if it's going to be on a Friday night, Friday during the day, sometimes that day I don't have a song yet, and I'll make one up for the group. So, and I hear that in my songwriting classes too. It's like, without the deadline, people would not be writing. So there's something, maybe that has to do more with adulthood.
Right.
That certainly was not the case when I was a teenager. I just wrote all the time just because I wanted to and felt like it. But now it seems like I have no idea what just happened.
uh,
I got an incoming call or something, but
okay.
yeah, sorry about that.
It's hard when you do the switch over. I do that all the time with my phone where I'm like, hold on, I'm like, and then I'm talking to another person. I'm like, oh, Steve, oh, hi, Steve. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Sorry about that.
oh, it's all good. So adulthood kicks in. Stuff gets harder to
Yeah.
at least have time to do. I think that's where I lost you.
Yeah, and just the deadline I find for myself and for others is really helpful in just making you do it, I think. Like, it's like, okay, I got to do it.
Right. Do you think
Yeah.
when you first started writing, was it almost easier? Like I've talked to quite a few people about writing, and like it seems like as a teenager, I can just write whatever all the time, just keep coming out with stuff. Did you
Yeah.
notice that at all?
Yeah, I think you don't think about it. It's just like you're
Mm,
compelled to do it. And I never had to think about it. I don't remember ever thinking about it as a kid or as a teenager.
right.
It was just like, I don't remember trying to make myself do it ever, but I wrote, you know, dozens of terrible songs, and that weren't even like, I guess my dream was to someday play them for people, but I wasn't playing them for anyone. So it was just this drive to express myself in some kind of way. And that continued well into my 20s. And even with, like, Stump the Host, those songs, I just would just write songs, and it was so fun to have a band
Right.
and to think, oh, how will the band play this? Ooh, how that, that was. I just remember bringing all kinds of different songs to the band, and it was just such a thrill to try them out and play. And every time we had a gig, I was like, oh, we got to play a new song every gig. So I'd write a new song for
Whoa.
that, which I guess was a kind of a deadline, but it was super fun. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a grind. I think it wasn't until probably toward the end of Stump the Host, I probably started feeling pressure and feeling like I can't just write songs all the time like this.
Well,
what am I going to write about?
Right. There's the input output theory, right? You got to take in, put out. You got to experience the share experience.
Yeah.
So when did Dolly Varden come? When did Stump the Host become Dolly Varden?
Around like Stump the Host sort of disintegrated around 93, and we got for various reasons. We had a publishing deal with Polygram that was, and then there was lots of music biz interest, and it sort of messed up. I think it messed up the band. It pulled us in directions that it really was a fun band that was kind of all over the place stylistically, and having the record labels sniffing around and talking about, well, you should do this, or you should do this, or you got to lose your drummer and get a new drummer, or you got to, and it just messed with us. And we're like, of course we wanted it, but it just pulled the whole thing apart. So Diane and I at that point were married and had a little kid, and we knew we wanted to keep singing together. So that's how Dolly Varden started, around probably 94, 95. Gosh. The first record was in 95.
Okay. And like, that was you guys did all that on 4-track, right? That was all like a DIY deal, right?
Yeah. Well, that was because we had no money. So we did it on the 4-track.
That's awesome though. That makes it, that's where the real deal stuff comes out, That's when when it matters the most, when it's 100% in your hands and you can make it exactly how you want to be.
It was really, really fun. It was really, really fun. And it was such a thrill. Like back then, the radio station, like even the big commercial radio station here, would play local music. And they played that record on the radio, like in like drive time. It was amazing to hear those songs we made on a 4-track coming over the radio. And it was a huge thrill.
That's sick. That's so awesome. When did with Dolly Varden, like as far as like songwriting, is it a split between you and your wife, or like is that more of a group collective effort?
Oh, it's primarily me. Diane wrote more early on.
Okay.
The first record has, maybe it's like a third to 2/3 me.
Gotcha.
I mean, she's been writing less. Although this group that we're in now, this monthly songwriting group, she's been writing a lot again. So at some point, hopefully, we'll get more Diane songs out in the world.
That'd be awesome. Is there like as far as like because did she study music too? Was she coming, or was she just a fan of music?
No, she just well, actually, that's not true. She was a singer, like a classical singer. She went to the Interlochen Arts Academy in Michigan for high school as a singer.
Wow.
So, but she mostly credits the harmony singing thing with singing with her dad. Her dad was a huge music fan and knew all the old folk songs. So, singing harmony with her dad.
Interesting. I mean, to do that type of like classical singing, you got to learn like 3 languages. You got to learn French and German and like Italian. It's not an easy like just learning to sing. It's like I gotta learn whole different dialects and context. But and it kind of like shifted to this recent record. her dad inspired your in-laws, right? Inspired some of the
Yeah,
retreat
yeah.
from songwriting, right? And music in general.
Well, yeah, he died in Thanksgiving of 2017, and he was an old guy, so that wasn't too much of a shock, although it was sad.
Right.
The hard one was her mom, who died shortly thereafter. She had a stroke and then died in early 2018, and that was just that was really, really hard for everybody. She held a lot together for everybody. She was an incredible person and was kind of had become like a mom to me too. I definitely felt it.
Yeah.
I felt it pretty powerfully. And I was dealing also with sort of coming to terms with stuff that had happened in my family. Yeah, so that was a sort of a collapse of things and just kind of like, ugh. So I took a break. Yeah, I took a
Right.
break from.
Rightly so. That's some heavy shit. Like
Yeah,
mixed all
yeah.
together and like that is yeah. So like but with that break within, was it just taking time for yourself, or is that when you started to like just it was it
Hmm.
because was music in her family, did that resonate? Like, was it? I'd imagine just if her dad was that into folk music, I imagine her mom was. Imagine did that
I
like
don't
have?
know.
Yeah.
I don't know, Phyllis. I mean, I think Phyllis liked music, but it wasn't a thing for her really.
Okay. It was so,
Yeah.
but still that because with that kind of like space you give yourself to open to catch the phrase or to or you
Hmm.
know what I mean or just let the whimper of an emotion fall into a thing. Like it sounds like all those experiences and all that stuff you were working through at that time too heavy to allow that space, maybe, or had to do it in a different way.
Maybe. I think I had run myself ragged, and
Okay,
I was playing in a bunch of different bands as a sideman, and I just said I can't do any of this anymore. So I quit all those bands. I didn't take any shows. I didn't write any songs. I think I just needed to clear out and not think about it.
right,
To kind of like what I was telling people was like, I just need to figure out why I even do this in the first place. Like why do I do this? I've been on this pursuit, this sort of hot pursuit for since I was, you know, 14.
right.
And I think I just mental exhaustion that was prompted by the deaths of those people and, the politics of with the state of the world and just
Right.
being so freaked out and disappointed in people. Um, yeah, I just needed to stop, and I did.
It's all that put together is like it's interesting because like when you do music full time, you do not just that. You're not just doing your thing on your stage for your show, but just with the way the world is, you got to take a million different gigs and like and
Yeah.
teaching as much as you have like because that was the next thing after the record store, right? Was jumping into teaching for the old school
Yes.
folk. Okay, and like and doing all the other side gigs where you're supporting and then have to be enthralled with what you're doing and be like it's relentless.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it makes sense that you'd have to scale back and figure out what. Now, did the Richard songwriting class was that hit home really hard, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah. So I signed up for this thing. Richard Thompson does this yearly uh, week-long thing in the Catskills that I'd always kind of had my eye on. It's like, well, that would be fun. And then when Phyllis died, Diane's mom died, I was talking to Diane and I was like, I think I should do this thing. She's like, yeah, you should just do it. So I signed up for it. It's a lot of money, but one of the big reasons was because Patty Griffin was um, the special guest songwriting teacher that year, and I'm a huge fan of hers, like just crazy super fan.
Yeah.
And so sort of just sitting with her, she did these group classes where there's probably 15 people, and just talking about songwriting, be able to ask her questions directly, and then she gave us songwriting assignments, and so I played a song for her and got good feedback. It was
Nice.
just really, really inspiring. I felt like a little kid again. I felt that kind of rush of just the joy of creation, and it was cool. It was very cool. So I came home from that and wrote basically all the songs on this new record. I wrote basically a double album. I have a whole other side of a whole other 45 minutes of music. The project was originally going to be a double LP, but it just seemed like too much that nobody was willing to put out a double LP, and I didn't have the money to do it myself, and I wanted it to be on a record, so on a label. So
gotcha.
So it's a single LP, but I had a double LP worth of material, so that'll come out soon, I guess. Maybe early next year.
Okay, that's it. It's amazing. Can I ask, like, what type of assignments, before I go on my thought, like, what type of songwriting assignments were assigned during this, like, this?
The one was she played Screaming Jay Hawkins, I Put a Spell on You.
Yeah.
And she said, I want you to write a song inspired by this song. And there's a song on the new record called I Will Never Stop Being Sorry that's the song I wrote for that assignment. Which is kind of basically takes the basic chord progression and change, adjusts it. But she also told, like, write the song that you've been afraid to write, or that you don't, that the song that's, the song that you've been afraid to write. And I think that was it. And so I think I combined those.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. It's those, like, small premises that can have big reveals.
Totally.
And unless you think about it or put that in front of you as the question and answer, you wouldn't do that. Man, these classes seem really, really awesome.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like, as far as, like, anyone who's, I guess this applies to anyone for any creative endeavor that you do, like, once a little bit of, like, positive feedback inspires so much later,
right?
Like, and maybe I can relate, I can explain it through music, but how many times do you get no as can I play here? No. Can I open for them? No. Can you help me record this? Probably not. Do you think this verse fits here? No. Like, you just live in this world of being told no.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, booking shows, my God, that is the worst, especially back in the day when you had to call people.
Right.
It was horrible, because they'd just be like, call next week. A lot of times you wouldn't even get a no. You'd just get this, like, call me next week. Call me next. And you just go, that could go on for months.
Right. I guess that still kind of happens now with email. Like, let's touch base in a month. Hello? A month later.
I know.
No response. Like,
yeah.
But the kind of it's so I always find that this little bit of inspiration does so much, and, like, a little bit of sunlight will make a plant grow. Like, all these little things do so much, and, like, you never know when you're doing that for someone, and, like, it like, you never, you know what I mean? Like, it's such an interesting, like, thing that something so small can radically change someone's perspective of life. Especially in this, like, creative endeavor, like, field of living, and so that's so awesome that you went to this class, and, like, after teaching all these classes, as someone who teaches, just to know that going back to classes still pays off, is inspiring to hear.
Absolutely. Hey, you know what? Speaking of teaching, I'm sorry. I actually have another lesson. I
Oh,
wonder
you're
if could we continue this later this afternoon, possibly?
1 week later.
Sure.
but and I think this actually worked out for the better because I ordered your book, right? And I didn't get it by the time we were talking last time, but I got it like the next day, so I've had time to read it
Oh,
and
wow.
get to do part 2 with the questions I would have came up with that. So
Okay, cool.
I'm glad we're getting to do this.
Excellent.
But before we dive into that, I wanted to ask you about 22 Rubber Bands.
Okay.
Like that, the melodies behind that and going into that falsetto, it's such a beautiful song and beautifully written, but I don't know the narrative. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like
Oh,
it's hitting something specific, and not to be like, tell me what your song's about, because it can be about nothing, and that's totally cool. But I think it's hitting a little more home with the rest of the content of the record. But
yeah. No, that one's a little more cryptic for sure. Um, the story is, and I don't mind telling the story because I don't think it undermines the concept. I think it helps. Sometimes when people find out what songs are about, they are disappointed. But I think in this
right,
case, it's important to know. Um, when my kid was little, like they're now 29, but when back around 4, probably pre-kindergarten, so 3, 4 years old, maybe into 5, we had a cooperative daycare with 4 different houses in the neighborhood. So one day we would have the 4 kids, another day then in one neighbor down the street had 4, and then anyway, one of the people in the daycare was a few blocks away. So I would go over there to walk Eva home. And on the way home, they always found little rubber bands in the street. And it became like a little mission. And I think they're the little rubber bands that girls used to braid their hair is the best explanation. But they were all over, and by the time we got home, Eva would have a handful of these rubber bands, and it was just as a silly, fun thing. And then so the story is just a memory of that was just kind of a sweet time when there was really nothing to do other than make it from that house to our house at some point. And so we would often stop by this little store that was by a giant hole in in the sidewalk, and we'd walk past the Johnny Machine Garden. And so it's just a little vignette of a memory of a sweet time with my youngin.
and
Yeah.
it's interesting because certain songs ruin the mystique when you learn the story, but like also like a kind of a takeaway from Take It to the Bridge is to write specific from your perspective, right? And
Yes,
like
exactly.
and which makes so much sense because someone can relate to that specific instance way more than a broad nondescript walk in the park song. You know what I mean? Like
I think so. I mean, that's the thing that I've learned from the classes and then from my own writing. That when people hear really specific details about someone's life, they get pictures, but it causes them to reflect on their own experiences. So I've had people that have heard that song say like, "Oh, this reminds me of when my daughter was a little kid and things we used to do." So basically it causes people to reflect on their own experience, and that's basically what I think I do when I hear songs like that. I don't There's an empathy thing, but there's also it causes you to to reflect on your own experience, similar experience.
Um, with the choice of head voice, was there like or falsetto, was there an influence out of the artists we talked about last time that maybe made that choice more appealing with the how you convey yourself?
Interesting. I mean, I've always loved the sort of falsetto. Like Al Green is one of my favorite
I was
singers.
gonna say Al Green. All right, that's so cool. Yeah, because oh man, I forget. It was like I think it's Take It to the Anchor or earlier solo
Oh, Sweet
album,
as the Anchor.
Sweet
Yeah,
as the
yeah.
Anchor. I'm mixing up titles now because
No, that's fine. No
but
problem.
but there's one where I'm like, I think that's that it's an Al Green almost progression, and like, and
Oh
then
yeah,
you
the Love is a Blessing song.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
and like, I was like, that has to be a thing. So okay,
it's totally a
all right,
thing.
Al
Yeah,
Green,
yeah. No,
beautiful,
and in fact, production wise, that's the thing I reference the most is that Al Green, Willie Mitchell records.
right?
Like the sound of the instruments, the sound of the drums, the sound of the vocals. I mean, I've tried really hard to get the sound of the strings, and I've not mastered that yet. But um, I think I got the drums pretty good, especially like so that the opening track on the new record is. I mean, the intro is a exact steal from an Al Green song. But so yeah, and I played pre-COVID. I played in an Al Green cover band here for a little while. That was
Yeah,
actually pretty good. Pretty
nice.
good cover band. Yeah.
What were you singing, playing in that one? What was that?
Yeah, there was three vocalists. I was one of three vocalists that took turns, and it had horns and yeah, big rhythms. It was super fun, super
That's
fun.
so sick. What tunes would you sing?
Most of the greatest hits, and then a few deep cuts. But I had sang "Tired of Being Alone," and I sang "Bell" was one of the
Okay.
ones I did. I'd have to go back and look at the set list and remember. It's been a little while.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can hear that in your register, in your vocal register. It's interesting because Al Green, like those records are so beautiful, but they groove so hard, but it's
Yeah, I
so
know.
delicate. You know what I mean? Like he gets
Oh,
up
he's
there,
whispering. He's
right,
whispering sometimes.
right,
Yeah, it's amazing.
but you can hear it and it's clear, and he
Right.
controls
Yeah.
that whole situation.
Yeah. It's stunning. It's stunning. Yeah.
Okay,
So, I mean, I think as a white guy trying to sing like Al Green, I end up sounding like, I don't know, Beck or something like that. I don't know what other people would reference, or maybe Daryl Hall does that
okay,
sometimes.
yeah,
But I think, the white guys are all trying to sound like Al Green or any of those great 70s falsetto singers.
right.
Like, I don't know the name of the guy from the Spinners or the
Um,
OJs. I don't know their names, but those guys that are just
No, I agree. I think everyone's trying to sound like Al Green. You put on that
like,
record,
yeah,
everyone thinks they can hit those notes. They go for it,
yeah,
and you'll be
yeah,
surprised on who can. You're like, oh shit.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, but that's so cool. All right, because I kept hearing that, and it wasn't just. It was few. It was going through your discography. It was a few times that hit home. Interesting. So kind of like the take it or to take a lip from the book. Um, there's this quote in there where you say, how am I gonna? I can't say it verbatim, but basically, pop music is up for just steal it, take the thing and use it to express yourself. You said it more eloquently,
Mm.
um, or the pop music is. Hold on. Here we go. Pop music has been written by thieves, so don't feel guilty about borrowing ideas. And I was like,
it's
that's so punk rock and so on point.
well, it's true. I mean, nothing. Yeah, it's all repurposed. Everything, right?
Right. And like I just think that's such a beautiful point to bring up in like an idea of making your own ideas is we all take from something else. I know this is kind of
Right.
like now we were talking about a few of the new tunes and now it's like slamming into the book because that's just where my brain's been at. But
No
like
problem.
but I think that's such an important lesson to take and to be able to like just even referencing like Al Green, if you look in those records, how much of that's taken from somewhere else and like and then continues to be uh, pulled apart and put in other things. Like hip hop's like
Right.
such a clear cut example of that.
Sure. Sure. No, it's a logical expansion. I mean, that's the thing is the building blocks are all the same. So it's the nuances and the sound of the person's voice and the way that no two voices sound alike. And we're all dealing with the raw material of the same 12 pitches and most of the songs are in 4/4 time. So there's not a huge amount of variety in the raw materials, but boy, the little nuances make all the difference. Just the, slightly delaying the snare drum makes a huge difference.
Right.
So there's a lot of room for variation. One of the biggest things that people worry about in songwriting class is that they're stealing, or that that something's not original. So I have to remind, I just say that every time. Don't worry about it. Do not worry. You're not going to get sued unless you're selling 1 million copies of something. And if you do get sued, then just say sorry, and share the royalty. But which is, the most recent version of that I know of is that Sam Smith song that sounded like a Tom Petty song. I don't know that anybody realized it until it came out. And I think Tom Petty and him just came to an agreement. They're like, all right, we'll just share the royalties. No harm, no foul.
Right.
So, right. And they're both good songs. So,
yeah. And like the two different genres, two different,
right.
At one point you're going to hit upon the same, or like grouping of like
Yeah.
3 notes or 2 notes in a particular
Yeah.
rhythm. Like, there's no getting around that. You also had a really good way to put it in the book. You said, don't worry about being original, worry about being honest.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a beautiful way to encapsulate that whole, like, at the beginning, because that's what is conveyed through songwriting. That's what resonates with people, is your honest expression.
Well, and the truth is, the more honest you are, the more unique you'll be. Like, if you're true to
Right.
yourself and you let your true voice come through and your true thoughts come through, then you will be unique. You will be original, because no two people are alike. So it's a sort of a win-win, or it's a mind game to get you to be original, because I think people are so worried about whether what they're doing is valid or not that they copy. Everyone does that. I did that too. You copy things because you think that's how it's supposed to work.
Right.
But then you end up just sounding like a not quite as good version of the thing you're copying.
Right. Or it's interesting to me because, like, when you start learning, right, you learn the cover songs, and there's that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Mary Oliver, the poet?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. She's got all these really rad books on how to read and understand and write poetry.
Oh.
And there's one called, I think it's just called the Handbook of Poetry, and like,
I got to get that. I only know her sort of nature poetry, and
right.
it's very beautiful. But I didn't know she had a sort of creative writing book.
Yeah, she did I think she'd
Oh,
do
cool.
lectures and had like a whole
Oh,
course.
cool.
There's 2 of them that I've found. There's one called the Rules for the Dance, which is all about metered poetry, right? Like,
Okay. Yeah.
gets real specific, and like,
Okay.
which is very musical. It's very
Sure.
rhythmic, and like,
Absolutely.
and it's interesting. But I'll finish my thought before I go into that. Uh, there's this quote from her from the poetry handbook, and I'm probably going to say it wrong, but basically it was like, to fully express yourself, you need to have perseverance, or dedication. Um, what was the other thing? You need to be dedicated and use. I can't remember how she said it now. Now I gotta have all my quotes in front of me. That it express yourself through dedication, replication, and something else. Ah, gosh. But basically, it was the point.
Okay.
Like, you have to express yourself. You gotta learn from the shoulders of giants. And
Right.
like,
Totally. Yes.
oh man, I wish I had that right now. That was a whole good point of this interview. I'm just stumbling on words.
Well, yeah, I think that's true for any art, right?
Yeah.
You learn through imitation, and you learn all the rules, and then you are free to sort of expand and explore your own creative impulses. It's the kind of thing where John Coltrane learned every scale known to humans and could play inside out of, a chord change, every measure, or every bar, or every beat. And then he made music that had no chords,
Right.
And so through learning all the quote unquote rules, he found freedom.
Mm.
So I think, that's kind of I mean, he's also a super genius, but
Right. But that's the takeaway, right?
yeah,
Is like
yeah, right,
once you can learn all the ways one thing can be done, you can do it the way no one's done it before, and
right,
still do it the way everyone wants you to do it.
right.
Uh, it's interesting with songwriting like that because like some things that or just even to quote Coltrane, like some things that are so profound, like you get so caught up in the weeds of like, oh, he's hyperimposing these melodies or these chord changes over a blues progression. Do you hear
Right.
those? You know what I mean? Like, into the average listener, they're like, what is going on? So there's this freedom that you gain, and also this lack. Like, I don't know. I think through
Hmm.
going through that makes that genius. Like
Yeah.
it almost to the
Right.
average viewer, listener, writer, maybe it wouldn't seem as profound as it is.
And I guess and something a little closer to home would be Bob Dylan learning every Woody Guthrie song,
Right.
going to visit Woody Guthrie at the hospital, getting to know him, and sort of like using that as his template, and then within a year, completely not bypassing that, but expanding on it and making, finding his own voice. But he basically learned the rules of how to make up songs by and his deep immersive study of Woody Guthrie.
Right. Like he had all those talking blues songs that were very
Right.
Guthrie-esque. But yeah, but through imitation, I think that's where you find yourself, and to some degree,
Hmm.
like I think to speak upon like sometimes you do come out sounding like the diet version of fill in the blank, but
Right.
also at some points too, you can like wear your influences on your shoulders and like find a way to make it like Stevie Ray Vaughan sounded a lot like Hendrix, but and he wasn't, you know what I mean? But he
Right.
definitely did his own thing with it, and like you
Hmm.
can celebrate your influences so everyone else can be a um, um, so everyone else can celebrate those influences with you and how you
Hmm.
incorporate
Right.
it
Right.
to your own. Um,
Right.
but I think that's a fine line. I think that's a fine line of knowing yourself, which comes through everything previously of trying to be someone else and then finding you.
I think you're right.
Um, but the kind of so out of this songwriting book, Take It to the Bridge, what I found was really cool about it was like there's this discussion at the front, like the big chunk of it, like the first 100 pages is like an interview, and then the next portion of the book was assignments, and like
Hmm.
then like out of all those assignments, there's like 10, 13. Um, which one do you find yourself going back to more
Oh
often
wow.
when
Oh
you're
my
doing your
gosh.
own?
Oh boy. That's a tough question because I don't. I maybe a little combination of all of the the melody stuff. There's a melody assignment. There's a storytelling assignment. The form stuff I use all the time. So like the
Yeah.
Beatles form one,
Okay.
the AABABA song with refrain. I use that form a lot. Um, I mean, they're all outgrowths of things that I've learned over the last, 40 years of writing songs. So I probably use all of them. I don't use like, there's a couple of trick ones, like use your phone number to generate a
Yeah.
melody. I don't use that.
That's a good start for
Um,
someone who hasn't. I thought that
yeah,
was a unique way to think about it, but like,
sure. Write in the style of, I mean, I write in the style of things. One of the songs on the new record, the one called I Will Never Stop Being Sorry, was it actually Patty Griffin gave us the assignment at
mm,
that songwriting workshop. It was to write a song somehow influenced by "I Put a Spell on You" by Screamin' Jay Hawkins.
right.
So that's where I grabbed basically the groove and the bass line from that song and wrote a new song on top of it. So I don't know if that's in the style of, but using other source material as the sort of bed to put something new on.
Right. What about the chords in the moving in fourths? I found that really interesting, and using the
Oh yeah, I
parallel
use that all
minors.
the time. I mean that's kind of just Western music harmonic sort of progression 101 stuff that
Right.
as you study old, like especially the Great American Songbook stuff that all those progressions move with bass root motion in fourths. And since I studied all that stuff with my guitar teacher in Idaho and with at Berklee, I kind of already think in those terms.
Yeah, okay. Interesting, because like I found the parallel minor stuff really really intriguing because like you think of like
Yeah.
the secondary dominants and like you hear that a lot in like the ragtime and jazz
Sure.
and
Yes.
like
Yes.
all those like movements like that, and I've never really thought of it as in fourths, which that was pretty
Oh,
profound. Like I've never analyzed it like that, but that makes sense, and I never thought
well,
of it.
here's why. I'll tell you why. And I might have written this in the book, but I can't remember. Is that in my classes I'm teaching, almost almost all of them are guitar players. Occasionally we'll get a piano player, but for the most part
Yeah,
they're guitar players. And the guitar strings are already in fourths.
right.
So rather than saying it's the circle of fifths backwards, it made more sense
Mm,
for me to say, well, you already have E, A, D, G, and you already know the names of your strings, and they're already arranged in that order. So just to extend it out in, in both
yeah.
directions, so that they see it that way. And I think it was just it's basically for guitar players to understand root motion in fourths, rather than introducing the circle of fifths, which is very confusing to people. So
Right. It seems way
yeah,
more intimidating than I think it
yes,
actually is. Like it's
right,
like
exactly. It's not, but it seems like it is.
it says geometry. What's going on? I'm here to write
Right, I
songs.
know. Math. Ah.
Exactly.
The parallel minor thing was from studying Beatles songs, and I
Oh,
think there was some in-depth study of the harmonic content of Beatles songs um, on some online discussion, and that's where I started hearing talk of the parallel minor, because that was not part of a discussion at Berklee. And I went, I mean, I sort of eat up the harmony part of music theory. I just love chord theory, and
right.
it makes me really happy. I don't know why, but parallel minor, as far as I recall, was never introduced that way. They would call it just a key change, but they wouldn't
Right.
call it. But with Beatles songs, they go in and out of major to minor, like major to parallel minor a lot. And once I sort of unlocked that door, it made so much more sense, like how the Beatles songs how they were thinking, and who knows how they came across that. But obviously, they loved that sound because it's in. Once you start looking at all the songs, you're like, oh my God, there it is again. It's in at least half the songs. They're doing some grab from parallel minor.
That's super interesting because like
It is.
it's something in at least my music education that was you learn about it, but it's just an extra question on the test. You don't really dive into that at all.
Right.
So to see it as a songwriting tool, I was like, oh, that's really cool.
It's
Like
really cool. Yeah, I
so
love it.
Um, and also, I find it like, with harmony and traditional harmony and learning how like sevenths and resolve and the Neapolitan whatevers and like, you know what I mean? Like learning
Yeah.
that type of movement, it does have that like, it seems like it goes to all this resolve, right? And it just wants to get back to home. And that's like the dopamine spike, right? That's
Right.
right. That's like, this is where it goes. And you kind of mention not kind of. You do mention in this book about reading Daniel Levitin's the How Your Brain Works on Music,
Right. Yep.
um, which I've read that a few years ago, and I've studied music therapy at CSU, so that was kind of like
Oh,
a
cool.
big chunk of it. And like not his book, his book was on my own time, but it's such a fascinating read, and like
Yeah.
to dive into that as a songwriter, like and especially since you've been writing songs before that, how did the enlightenment of like oh, your brain just hears rhythm. You know what I mean? Like the little tidbits
Yes.
from that book. How much did that change your perspective on on songwriting, or maybe how much did it redefine certain elements of songwriting for you?
I think it was more how to approach recording,
Okay.
in that I think two things happened. I was reading that book where he talks about how rhythm is the first thing that our brains perceive and latch onto because
Right.
it's in the brain stem, right?
Yep. In the cerebellum.
And um, and at the same time, I was reading interviews with Paul Simon where he was talking, basically saying the same thing,
Mm.
and that's what caused him to move from harmonically really rich songs to more rhythmic based songs. So that would be like Hearts and Bones into Graceland,
Right. Right.
right? That he wanted more of a rhythmic underpinning rather than a harmonic scaffolding, because he wanted music that was more, I don't know what the right word is, but that was more immediately gratifying or capturing. Um, and then I think I read the magazine Tape Op,
Okay.
and I've learned a lot about recording. I pretty much learned everything about recording through Tape Op and trial and error. And there was discussion in there too about if the rhythm track is messed up, the song's never going to work. So it was
Right.
all these things coalescing at the same time where I thought, okay, I need to concentrate more on the rhythmic bed of these songs
Mm.
to make them, I don't know, to make them more enjoyable.
Right. Well, it's interesting because like through Daniel's work and like I'm trying to also tout from NMT studies, like your brain, like once you have that, your brain's like, or the what's the Gestalt uh, expectancy principle of
I don't
expectations.
know that. Don't
All
know
right.
that one.
All right. I think it's in Levinton's book. It's in a lot of NMT books, but the Gestalt philosophies, no, not philosophies. I'm just blanking out. But anyway, the expectation principle, right? So your brain's predicting what's
Oh,
about to
yes, yes,
happen,
yes. Okay,
right?
right,
And it likes it. So when there's something like Paul Simon, like there's a rhythm that repeats, your brain's already in this dopamine, like it's
right,
reacting. It likes what it's doing, and then if you put something on top of it, you're going to pay more attention to it. And like
right. Exactly. Yes.
for me, like when I learned that, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Why bands like James Brown, like
Right,
that's nothing but a groove, and then like a
right.
shout chorus repeated a lot. This expectation thing keeps happening, and it's a really profound thing, and like it makes like trance music seem very like enlightening in that sense, and like
Totally.
music that maybe would have seemed boring, but it's like this platform for other things.
Well, right. And when you get a sort of hypnotic rhythmic thing going, any little thing that occurs on top of it, you're keenly aware of, which is, yeah, that's really cool.
Right.
Richard Thompson said a really cool thing, a really interesting thing at that workshop I went to. He said all great pop songs have some element of a drone
Hmm.
in them,
Interesting.
which, I mean, it seemed like a hugely grand statement, but the idea that there's some kind of a tone somewhere in there that's basically constant,
Hmm.
either a bass line or a melody note or something going on in the thing that has like that sort of hypnotic draw in it. And I think he was talking about, when he says pop music, I think he means non-classical music going back as far as history. Because, I mean, Indian classical music and Celtic music and certainly like bagpipes and all that kind of stuff, it's all drone. It's all
Right.
drone music.
Right.
And
So almost.
it has that hypnotic thing that I think also pulls us in and lures us in hypnotically, and then all the stuff added on top of it, maybe your mind is more open to or something. I don't know.
That makes sense, right? Like
Yeah,
it's a almost like all secular music in a way. But
right.
it's interesting because even like historically, like music that was in the church was pretty just like octaves, right? And we weren't doing
Yeah,
thirds or anything. Or even through music history, it gets crunchier and more tension. And
yes.
but I guess it can all be in a weird way. It can all be traced back to that one pitch. That's a pretty profound statement.
Yeah,
That's
right.
really rad. Yeah, I dove into his records since we talked, and man, he's an insane writer too.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah.
Did you? How'd you? So just were you aware of his records?
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Okay, so just from diving in this, because I feel like listening to him, I'm like, this is a songwriter. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like, this is not just like, you wouldn't hear this on the radio and be like, oh, I'm gonna dive into that more. You would have to
Right.
find this guy, and like,
Yeah, and he has just rabid super fans. You know, kind of. Yeah.
rightly
Yeah.
so. Like, and
Right. Good. Oh,
so
good.
it's here. I know it.
Okay. Good.
Oh,
Excellent.
one more thing before I wrap up, I wanted to ask you about is like you toured with the Government Mule.
We did
How is
because
that?
well, I mean, it was fun, but it was a terrible match. The
Right.
reason it happened is because the woman who owned Evil Teen Records was and thinks still is Government Mule's manager and is married to Warren Haynes. So
Oh, okay.
she threw us on the front end of a bunch of their Midwest shows. I mean, they were super nice and they're incredible and they fill big rooms, but we just Dolly Varden set up, you know, and played. I mean, people were pleasant, but it wasn't. Yeah, it was not the right. It was not the right.
Right. It's a different style because they're there for the
Yeah,
jams and the guitar solos and like,
totally.
and
No, and we're like kind of folk rock.
right.
It's kind of quiet. So
That's still sick though. To be around musicians like that, you know what I mean? Just,
oh yeah,
I
and
mean,
they were sweethearts. Yeah.
oh, that's so cool. Awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks so much.
All
And
right.
cool
Great.
beans.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. All right.
All right.
Take care, my
Take
friend.
care. All right. Bye.
Bye.